called executive processing disorder. I don't know if you know what that is. It came from an accident that I had when I was a kid and damaged my brain. And it means that I can recognize logic and I can recognize organized thoughts, but producing them myself is very, very difficult. So the issue I had with my talk is I'm having a really hard time making it seem like it's cogent, coherent, and easy to follow, and that I'm making my main points, and that you're left with something that matters to you and makes a difference. So instead of performing my talk today, I'm just going to talk it through. I'm going to read it through to you, and I would like a workshop, if you don't mind, to tell me where I lost you. And this is what it devolves into anyway whenever I do my talks. You're like, yeah, great performance, but it was really hard to understand. So let's just get straight to the hard to understand and fix it. Does that sound okay with you?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you, Katherine. Have you ever felt unloved? Have you ever felt like love is something that you earn? If you answered yes to either of these questions, you're in the right place, because our speaker today helps women and men experience unconditional love for themselves and others. She is creator of the Light Solution, a step-by-step, holistic, comprehensive process which removes unhealthy thought and behavior patterns and lights the way for more effective, loving relationships, both professional and personal. She graduated from Smith College, yay, in 1992 and coached clients worldwide over 20 years. When she's not traveling, she's on the hunt for Atlanta's yummiest chocolate cookies. Cookies are gone. She'll be completely content with red wine. I think red wine. And she wants you to know that if you've got both, then she's really happy to come over. Please join me in welcoming from Atlanta, chocolate cookie evangelist, love activist, and light catalyst, Katherine Pike.
This past March, I was standing in my kitchen in Atlanta, Georgia, when my cell phone rang. It was my mom calling from Charleston. Katherine, my sister, your Aunt Susan, is dying. She has just 19% lung capacity. This week I was at her home in Louisville, Kentucky, and she didn't look good. And I thought you should know. So my first thought was, gosh, I wonder what this is like for my aunt. They have just 19% lung capacity. And my second thought was, what am I supposed to do now? This woman, Susan, is a person that I never called, I never wrote, I never visited. We really didn't have much of a relationship. My limited experience of her was that she was a pretty difficult person. At the same time, she's family. She was my aunt, and I loved her. Was this a good time to call her and tell her that? Now didn't seem like a good time. Wouldn't she be suspicious of my motives? Contacting her out of the blue now that she's on her deathbed. At the same time, I might miss a fleeting moment, a fleeting opportunity to hear her voice, to say hello, and to say goodbye. I stewed on this for a full week, and then thought, this is crazy, just call the woman. She's your aunt. Hi, Susan. It's your niece, Katherine. And what ensued was one of the most pleasant phone conversations I've ever had with any human. Susan was a teacher of English literature for decades, and she's a master of the English language. We had so much fun talking and laughing, playing with language. I knew I needed to see her in person. And again arose the thought, is this a good time? Is it too late? Well, she loved the idea of a visit to her home in Kentucky, and we had the greatest time just letting our hair down together, as much as that's possible. Talking sometimes about nothing important, and other times talking about deep, important matters of the heart. That visit changed me. And as I was driving home from Kentucky, I had this revelation. The best time to be loving is now. The best time to love is now. Today I'm going to share with you about love. why it matters, why we mess it up, and how to make a loving difference for yourself and others now. Why love matters is this: you are love. You are manifest of love. You are manifest of love from the moment you were created. From the moment you were even a thought, you were love. You came into this world as love. It's what you've always been. It is your true nature. Therefore, it is your nature to love, to be yourself. To withhold love has a strong cost, and I know this myself. Coming from a family of fractured relationships, there have been people like Susan who've been dead to me from almost my entire life. And what a cost it was to miss out on Susan all this time. I'm happy to report that she's still alive, and we've had a lot of wonderful visits since March, and our relationship has deepened. And I can only think of my being 48 and the 48 years I've missed with this fantastic lady. What might you be missing when you have forgotten who you are? So why do we mess up love? We get confused and we get scared. We worry that love is scarce and it feels withheld. It sometimes feels like we're threatened. We go into fight, flee, or freeze mode. We get competitive, so we fight. We flee. We run from feeling hurt. And we freeze. We're not sure what to do with our feelings. How can you make a loving difference for yourself and others now? Simply remember, there's no better time. Because when is the best time to love? When is it? When's the best time to love? Now. What if I had continued to wait and wait and wait to call Susan until there was nothing left to wait for? What are you waiting for? When it sometimes comes to feelings, it sometimes gets uncomfortable. And so we wait until it's more comfortable. Have you ever waited until it felt comfortable, until it felt like the right time to share your important feelings? I know, we get busy. We think they're too busy. They're going to think I'm a stalker. What if they reject me? So I'll wait. I'll wait until it feels right, because now's not a good time. Listen, it's always a good time. In fact, the best time to show you care, to share your love, is now. Open to your thoughts.
Thank you. Great, Mike. Let's hear you.
Well, I always enjoy listening to you, and we've had a long relationship of talking. You started off with a story, and it was a personal story, and there was even a slight emotional piece to it, and that made you real, and it made you vulnerable, and the audience generally will really, that engages people, because you're talking about a real situation. It's not that kind of thing. And particularly in the subject matter that you picked, which is love, that you've got us on the right wavelength. So I appreciate that, and thank you very much for sharing. And I also think that you also shared an important lesson in learning, because you did take that risk and you agonized over it. And you're walking me through a real world and your situation, which we can all relate to. I want to see more of that. And I want to give you some examples of where I want to see more of. Why love matters. And you talked about that, but I think you talked more about that in a theoretical standpoint. And I think you could go back to the same thing of maybe not personal examples, but at least stories of, you know, and one of the things you asked for is, and I was listening, is, you know, sort of the logical flow. I would love to hear you talk about why it's worth the risk, and examples of why it's worth the risk, and of loving someone. And I'd also, you hinted, but again theoretically, on the barriers of not wanting to get hurt. You know, you could, there's some richness there in why people are afraid. You know, they don't want to be turned down. You know, you know, it's a risk. But in essence, you're, at least where I think you're heading, is you're saying that take the risk. And I think you can build a stronger case by continuing the thought process you had at the beginning of examples that we can all relate to.
Thank you. Would it work to list the sections of what I'm going to talk about, the why love matters and what gets in the way and all that stuff, and then just, are you saying to flesh out those areas with more stories and examples?
Yeah, I wouldn't list that, makes it too formal. And you're dealing with an emotional kind of thing. Just walk us on the journey. You know where this isn't a corporate presentation.
Okay.
You know where you're going. But just in your own mind, you're going to tell the story, and then you're going to say, you know, sort of the end result was, gosh, how foolish I was to even think this way. And that's a wonderful example, and how I've connected with this aunt that is more than just comforting her and, you know, wanting to make sure that we're at peace before she passes away, but she's enriching my life. And hopefully I'm enriching her final days or whatever. But you're getting huge benefit out of it. And then, you know, not theoretically, but, you know, why are people hesitant? Because we all are. We don't want to get hurt. It's worth it. And that's your premise. And so you've got to mix in the why we don't. It's not that we're just stupid or mean, but why it's worth taking that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Who else? Steve?
I loved your call to action, like it was in there, and because you're congruent with that you've taken your own call to action, you've actually actualized the words you're saying so that they mean something. So just to emphasize that even more, like, you know, love, you know, really, you're going to be speaking to an audience who can receive that. So, you know, let that call to action be even articulated clearer and even more so that you've done in your own life.
Thank you. Wendy?
Katherine, you are love, babe. It's such a
Thanks.
perfect thing for you to be talking about. And, you know, the order, the logic part, I didn't even think about that. It all seems to flow pretty well for me. So, but there were a couple things that popped up, if I could share with you.
Yeah, please.
It was so I felt like, you know what it felt like, and using it theoretically, it felt like a sermon almost. You know, you really share it in that way. But it was interesting because as you talked about we, that I was uncomfortable with that. Wanting to hear not as much we, so it wasn't always me, like that's how I took it. So maybe more people do or many do and would not, and once again it could just be me, bristle me in that way. And then, and I know you shared some similar information with me, it's a deep topic, right? And so adding some of the lightness, the light that is in there. And so maybe, like there was a place that you shared two things that when you were called to love, I don't remember the first thing you did, but the second question you asked was, well, what do I do now? And maybe the third, and I don't, if the humor is appropriate, I'm not sure, but to tie it in with what do I do now, and where are those chocolate cookies? You know what I mean? Or something that would just give us because it was so, you know, that little bit, we both
Oh, that's
like to go
fabulous.
deep in that, right?
That's so
So,
perfect,
yeah.
because it's in the intro already,
yeah.
and that's actually what I usually think,
Yeah.
like when there's an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
It's like,
So
where's the
something
ice cream
like
and the
that.
cookies? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wendy.
You're welcome.
About your delivery though, that was intentional. You had decided you weren't going to be doing a lot of performance. You wanted to do a reading really,
Mhm.
so we could focus on the organizational, right? Okay. So I have a couple things. The line that you said, what might you be missing? To me, that's a great line, and I think organizationally, you could have those sections start with a question that turns us into our own experience. What keeps you from living? Have you been hurt? When was the last time you gave it a shot, pulled away and said, I am done with that? So that might help, because I did feel a little bit that I couldn't tell when was sort of a bucket and when was amusing on the previous topic. So I was a little bit unsure of the pacing. And then your powerful line, which was, when is the best time to love? Now, and we all said it with you. I think that that's so powerful, and having that and maybe one other would be so powerful if it's consistently that way. And when you delivered it the first time, you said a line prior, which was, when is the best time to be loving? When is the best time to love? And so something about that started to take the power away from the line. And then when you said it again the next time, I thought, no, that's the line.
So take away the loving?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other thing was when you said, what might you be missing? When have you forgotten who you are? I thought, okay, wait, that's a different idea. You've forgotten who you are. Unless what you meant is you are loved, so then you forgot that you were loved for a minute. So therefore, what might be, so you see where I was going?
Oh, okay, so it jumped a little bit, like the logic wasn't.
Content, the logic, right?
Yeah.
The content, the natural flow of those big ideas. And I have all kinds of things about love and why people don't want to do it and stuff, and so we should talk offline.
Awesome.
I
Thank you.
do have a premise that what makes you feel loved is loving. Loving. It's the act of loving others that makes you feel loved. And the call to love is so huge because of that. We all think we want to go get some. We want to go get some, but actually you get it, you get it. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Who else? Christy?
So I don't have a lot of comments, honestly, on the structure, and I'll tell you why. So my uncle passed away last Thursday, and the funeral is this Sunday. So this was, you never quite know who you're speaking to when you give a speech, right? I thought that what's the cost of love lost? What's the cost of that lost time of kind of thinking, oh, it's not the best time, it's not, this isn't right, was poignant. I loved when you talked about flight, flee, or freeze. I think there's another one in there, and that's flourish or something that gives us something that is a little bit more of a positive movement, right? So flight, flee, and freeze feels very kind of like a stop, right? And so I want to know what happens when we move towards love as opposed to away from it, right? So think of some other frames there. I loved the idea of framing and outlining maybe. Maybe if you went back, because God, it's just such a beautiful piece. I always like shy away from trying to restructure something that's so just beautiful that, but I think if you went back and did an outline and tried to take in your key points and break them out into 2 or 3 sections. I love the idea of starting with the questions. I think that might help, and maybe it's flight, flee, and freeze, and flourish. Maybe those are your your 4 big buckets. But figure out a way to bucket some of those points so that you don't. You take us on an amazing journey, but it did feel like we were kind of kind of just moving through. So what is the destination at the end, or am I going to be just kind of left with this feeling, right?
Right,
As
yeah.
beautiful as the feeling is, am I left with it? Or do I have a purpose and I know what I'm going to go do with it now?
It's sort of like if you do that, then when you're doing it, you know it.
Yeah.
Because you just told us what we do, and there are like 5 things that we do that cause us not to have the love that we want. We flee, we get hurt, we're feeling spurned, all those things that you talked about in a way that I now know what to do with it. Call myself on it, check myself.
I dig it. Yeah, I can think of a lot of stories that would go with those as well, as Mike mentioned, to bring in the story with it. Is the fight stuff in the brother. Oh, it's good stuff, you guys. Good stuff coming.
I think there was another hand over here.
Oh, small, yeah. I didn't think it was hard to understand at all, so I've heard you give this talk before. Last time you and I spoke on the same day, you gave that. But talking about the stories, I felt like there was a gap, that there were some gaps between you getting up the courage to make the phone call and getting up the courage to buy the plane ticket to go out to see her. I mean, I think there were more of those, there were probably more of those uncomfortable emotions that you could weave into the story and, into the back end of your story. What did it feel like when you first, was it awkward when you first saw each other? You gave us the beginning and you gave us the end, but we didn't really get the middle.
Got it. Thank you.
You could also talk about some of those really intense physical reactions that you feel when you feel loss of love or spurned or, like the bottom fell out. Like, I couldn't believe she said that. I couldn't believe she didn't call me back. I couldn't believe that, whatever. Like that, just take us to the pain.
Okay.
You're good at that. Creating that physical experience that we all trigger and we know,
Awesome. Thank you.
That kind of made me think of something else too. First of all, this is fantastically improved from last time. I feel like you did a lot of work to really take some of the feedback we talked about before, and yeah, you totally got me on the emotional part. And it was good to see you in that at the beginning, so I think that was fantastic. Speaking of buckets and all that, because I've been trying to figure out what would that look like, because for me, I am very logical, so I need like a plan, like where are we going, what do I need to pay attention to? And so perhaps the buckets, as I was kind of listening to everyone, could be, why is love important? And you started to get into that, right? The second could be something about what gets in the way of love, like you were talking about the, essentially the symptoms that happen when you get super activated and all that. But then, instead of just giving us the best time to be loving is now, like the how behind that. So is your call to action, like how do we do that? And what could that look like for different people? Because I think we all express love in different ways, whether you want to take it from love languages to whatever, but give me some, like what is one simple step that I could take to demonstrate love now? And maybe that's like your call at the end of like pick one and what that might look like for you.
I like that. Thanks, Abby. Other thoughts? Yes?
I agree. I would just piggyback up with what some other people said in regards to the content. I love the topic. I'm a relationship coach, so that's right up my alley. I did feel the heart-to-heart message, so you did engage me with your message. The call to action, I think, was appropriate. The only suggestion I have would be in the closing, but I think other people have said that in a different way, so that would be the only suggestion.
What would you say about the closing? What would be effective for you?
Just more targeted and knowing that was the close, or maybe just giving another call to action, like this is where you need to take a step forward as an audience, as a person listening, what will you do next? After you've heard what I have to say, what are you going to do?
I love it.
Just to close.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you very much.
I love it.